do more research and get more of this underway.
There's another extension to your question where you touched upon the development not of new uses or better uses or valid human studies with the known compounds, but the development of unknown compounds. This is an area that is not going appreciably in the United States, but I assure you I know of several studies, people who choose not to be known publicly, in different countries around the world who are actively synthesizing, developing, tasting, and communicating with their allies information on new drugs. I would say and where was that talk we were back in Maine? Remember that talk where we were at?
Oh, not Camden.
Not Camden. Somewhere back there. It was a talk in which memory. I join you. In which I was asked what I thought that the number of psychedelic drugs would be in, say, 50 years, because everyone was talking about exponential this and exponential that. And I said, well, it's very simple. In 1900 or thereabouts, there were two psychedelic drugs that are known. There was the peyote, and there was marijuana. And then in the 50s, it had gone from 2 up to roughly 200. Or 20, 2 to 20, sorry, factor of 10, in which you now had LSD and some of the analogs of LSD. You had the beginnings of psilocybin and the chemistry that came from that area, and the various dialkyltryptamines were being developed. I had published quite a few materials in the phenethylamines, but I was not yet much into the tryptamines. And then as of the time of this talk, which is about a year ago, the number had clearly gone from 20 to 200, because there's a nice little factor of tenfold every 5 decades. And I can see with good confidence that 200 is going to become 2,000 by the year 2050. Because people are everywhere finding, well, what if you modified this to look like that? What if you add another group on over here? What about putting a chemical in this position that's lipophilic instead of lipophobic? Would that make it more active? Would it make it less active? Would it make it a different type of action? People who've been here we've all been talking about the effect of psychedelic drugs as if it were a single drug. But every drug is individual. Every drug has its own property, its own type of action. I've come across some rather fascinating potent compounds that are absolutely ugly in their psychedelic effects. One I remember I unraveled a little bit of was I think it was diisopropyl-tryptamine, in which the only effect it had was not on the visual but on the auditory. And it made everything totally out of tune. Some little careful work was done with that particular compound by some allies who are not publicly known, in which they used two forms of music sources. One was an oscilloscope, a sine wave generator, and the other was hitting the key on the piano. And have the people who have perfect pitch. One of the requirements for their students was they have perfect pitch. And they'd hit the note on the piano, and it would come out such and such. And they called the shot correctly. And as the experiment developed and the drug came on, they were going off more and more on the identification of what the pitch was. The pitch was too low. And the pitch was, but the beauty of it, it was not a too lowness as a 10% or 20%. It was too lowness in that each frequency of a complex waveform would go down by the same number of cycles. And hence you play an oboe on this machine, and it no longer sounds like an oboe because all the harmonics are out of pitch with one another, no longer harmonically related. It's just ugly music. But there's no visual. I mean, here is something. I mean, if you have a patient, let's say you have a patient and you want to do an experiment, and the patient hears God, and he talks to God all the time. He's a little bit perhaps on the schizophrenic side, but that's we have to determine. He does talk with God, but he has a voice. The voice is heard. He hears this voice. And is there an area in the brain that is uniquely dedicated to the pitch of sound? And when the pitch, and that's where this drug happens to go, maybe you could identify the nature of the sound structure on the basis of that. No visuals, but this auditory change is very real and is very consistent. I was talking to a person over in a year or two over in Marin County. I said, how could we use animals to study this? And the answer, I think, is very simple. I think there are birds, for example, that all have about the same call, but there are different pitches. And this pitch attracts those over there, this pitch attracts those over yonder, and the breeding patterns are established by the nature of the call. It's clearly that's the right bird, but this little group of birds has a pitch of its own. Give these birds some things to see they mess up their mating patterns. There are all kinds of things that can be done using animal studies where you don't have to call upon using an animal as a tool in a psychedelic study, but as a way of being able to trace where in the head these things go. It'd be simple to make the compound, that diisopropyl compound, a little bit of carbon-11, and put it in a person who hears voices, and see if it goes to a specific place in the brain, and that place might be labeled by radioassay of a scanning device of where distribution is. I mean, the idea of, I have to tell one story. I'll let you back up. Tell one story that went on up at Donner. We had a marvelous time. I was making some S-adenosine methionine with radiosulfur, because at the time methionine was thought to be a thing that aggravated schizophrenia, and if you were schizophrenic, then any food that was rich in methionine would make you worse. But if you were not schizophrenic, the methionine would have no effect on you at all. So I made this labeled tracer. And we got 5 normal subjects and 5 schizophrenic subjects as volunteers. The schizophrenics were easy to get. We went to Mendocino Hospital. Normals around Lawrence Lab were a little bit more difficult to pin down, but we managed to get 5 of each. And we gave this labeled material, the material, and took brain scans in the same section of the brain of all 10 people. And all 10 of these photographs, these pictures, were absolutely different from one another. There was no consistency of distribution of the radioactive material in the people's brains. And so we made no sense out of it all. We posted these 10 pictures on the wall of the radiation section up there at Lawrence Lab. And every time I have visiting scholars come in, we say, here, 10 people, look at this. This is S-adenosine methionine distribution, and 5 of these are schizophrenic, and 5 of these are normal. Which are which? And we'd keep tally. Total random responses. Until about 2 months later, one of the schizophrenic patients came in to visit my friend Tony, who has a way of interacting very nicely with these people, getting to be subjects. And he said, "Oh, those are the 10 pictures you took." He said, "Tony," I said, "Yep, that's me." And he pointed to the correct one for himself. And Tony said, "Well, you're absolutely right. How'd you know?" Kind of casual, trying